My brother-in-law bragged about selling our beach house. The house didn't belong to him, but I didn't say a word. We were all standing there, drinks in hand, talking loud, laughing. I smiled and stayed quiet. The night he raised his glass, I already knew something bad was coming. Not because he said anything shocking right away, but because of how comfortable he looked. Too comfortable, like a man who believed the room belonged to him. The soft yellow lights reflected off the glass in his hand, the ocean breeze rolled in through the open doors, and laughter floated through the room like everything was perfect. When he smiled, people smiled back. When he laughed, they joined him. And when he bragged about selling our family beach house for easy money, everyone nodded like it was the smartest thing they'd ever heard. Everyone except me. I smiled too. I kept my face calm. I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed with him, and not because I didn't care. I stayed quiet because I had learned something important about people like him. They reveal the most when they think no one is watching closely. And I had been watching him from the very beginning. My sister sat next to him, leaning in slightly, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. She looked proud. Not of the money, not of the idea of selling the house, but of him. That look hurt more than anything he said. She trusted him with her whole heart. And the sad part was, she didn't even realize how much of herself she'd already handed over. I remember the first time she brought him home. She was nervous in a way I hadn't seen before. She kept fixing her hair, smoothing her dress, glancing at him like she was hoping we'd all approve. He walked in with confidence, smiling wide, shaking hands firmly, making eye contact with everyone. He complimented our grandmother's cooking, asked about our childhood, talked about family values and loyalty. He knew exactly what to say, and everyone fell for it. Everyone except me. I couldn't explain it back then. There was nothing obvious, no rude comments, no raised voice, no clear red flags, just a feeling deep in my chest that something wasn't right. He listened too closely when money came up. He asked too many questions about property, investments, and inheritance, but always wrapped them in jokes so no one took them seriously. When our grandmother talked about the trust funds she'd set up for us, I saw his eyes sharpen for just a second. Just a flicker, but I saw it. My sister was in love, real love, the kind that makes you ignore small doubts because you don't want to ruin the good thing you finally found. She had been through heartbreak before him, and he came into her life like a savior. Flowers sent to her job, long phone calls late at night, messages every morning telling her she was special. He made her feel chosen. And when someone makes you feel chosen, you stop questioning their motives. They got married faster than I expected. Too fast, but everyone said the same thing. When you know, you know. Our grandmother cried happy tears at the wedding. She believed in him. She believed he would take care of my sister. She believed love was enough to protect someone. I wanted to believe it too, so again I stayed quiet. After the wedding, things shifted in small ways, nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make someone step in right away, but I noticed it. My sister stopped making decisions on her own. If she wanted to buy something, she'd say she needed to talk to him first. If she wanted to help someone, she'd hesitate. She used to be confident and independent. Now she second-guessed herself. And every time, he was right there, guiding her, advising her, controlling things without ever raising his voice. At family gatherings, money slowly became his favorite topic. Not in an aggressive way, in a smooth, casual way. He'd bring it up over dinner, over drinks, like it was just harmless conversation. He talked about investments, about returns, about how people wasted opportunities by getting emotional over assets. He laughed when he said it, so everyone laughed too, except me. Then he started talking about the beach house more often. That house wasn't just property, it was where we grew up spending summers, where our grandmother told stories on the porch while the waves crashed in the background, where we learned to swim, learned to laugh, learned what family felt like. He talked about it like it was just a number, a line on a spreadsheet. He said things like, that place could make serious money, and you can't let nostalgia get in the way of smart choices. My sister nodded along. She trusted him, she thought he was protecting their future, and every time I wanted to speak up I stopped myself, because I still didn't have proof, just instinct. And instinct isn't enough to tear a family apart. What no one knew was that years before he ever showed up, I had quietly bought the beach house. Not publicly, not loudly. I used an LLC, it was a clean decision, a smart one. At the time, it had nothing to do with drama. It was just business. Our grandmother knew. That was all that mattered to me. On paper, the house was no longer part of the trust, but he didn't know that, and he never bothered to check. As time passed, his confidence grew. He spoke like decisions had already been made, like everyone was just waiting for him to lead. He talked about renovations, about resale value, about timing the market. He said we a lot, but what he really meant was me. My sister followed his lead without realizing she was slowly losing her voice. The night of the dinner, everything came together. The house was full. Family, friends, laughter, wine flowing freely. The ocean outside was calm, the sound of waves steady and patient. And then he stood up, raised his glass, and laughed about flipping the beach house for easy money. He said it like it was already done, like it was his victory to celebrate. People laughed, someone clapped. My sister looked at him with admiration, and I stayed quiet. What he didn't know was that earlier that day, I had gotten a call. A contractor, a man he had hired and then underpaid, a man who had been promised money and then ignored. That contractor was angry, furious, and through family connections he reached out to me instead. He wanted answers. He wanted justice. And as he spoke, everything clicked. The man waiting outside that night wasn't just upset about money. He was the crack in the story my brother-in-law had been selling everyone. Proof that the charming image didn't match reality. Proof that behind closed doors, he wasn't the caring, responsible man he pretended to be. I watched my brother-in-law talk, laugh and brag, completely unaware of what was waiting just beyond the door. And I realized something important. He thought he was in control, he thought he had already won, and that made him careless. I didn't interrupt him, I didn't expose him, not yet. I took a slow sip of my drink and let the moment stretch. Because sometimes, the most powerful move isn't speaking. It's waiting. That night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning, the calm before everything unraveled. And as the waves continued to crash outside, steady and unstoppable, I knew the truth was coming. And when it did, it would hit harder than he ever expected. I remember how calm everything felt just before it all fell apart. That's what still gets me. The room was warm, full of laughter and half-empty wine glasses, and my brother-in-law looked completely at ease. He leaned back in his chair like a man who believed the future was already locked in his favor. My sister sat close to him, smiling, unaware that the ground under her feet was already cracking. And I sat there quietly, letting the moment stretch, because I knew something he didn't. The truth was already in motion. When the doorbell rang, the sound cut through the room sharper than it should have. Conversation slowed, a few heads turned. My brother-in-law paused mid-sentence, confused for just a second, then waved it off like it was nothing. He told my sister he'd handle it. He always said that. I watched him stand up, smooth his shirt, and walk toward the door with the same confidence he'd carried all night. He had no idea what was waiting on the other side. The contractor stood there stiff and silent, his jaw tight, his hands clenched like he'd been holding his anger in for weeks. Because he had. He didn't yell at first, he didn't make a scene. He just asked, calmly, if now was a good time to talk about the money he was owed. That was all it took. The color drained from my brother-in-law's face so fast it was almost shocking. For the first time, the mask slipped. Voices from the dining room went quiet. People leaned forward, listening. My sister stood up slowly, her smile gone, confusion written all over her face. She asked what was going on. My brother-in-law tried to laugh it off, tried to say it was a misunderstanding, that this wasn't the time. But the contractor didn't back down. He said he'd waited long enough. He said he'd been ignored long enough. And he said he wasn't leaving without answers. That's when I finally stood up. The room felt heavy as every eye turned toward me. I could feel my sister's confusion shift into something sharper, something closer to fear. I spoke calmly, slowly, because I wanted every word to land. I explained who the contractor was. I explained why he was there. And then I said the one thing my brother-in-law never expected to hear from me. I said the beach house wasn't his to sell. The silence that followed felt endless. My sister looked at me like she didn't understand the language I was speaking. My brother-in-law laughed nervously and said I was mistaken. He said the house was part of the family trust. He said he'd seen the numbers. He said everything was already being handled. That confidence came back for a moment, like muscle memory, but it didn't last. I told him the truth. That years ago, I bought the house quietly, legally, through an LLC, that our grandmother knew, that the paperwork was clean, and that he had no claim to it at all. I watched his face change as the words sank in. The smugness disappeared. The charm evaporated. What was left was panic. My sister looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. She kept shaking her head, saying this didn't make sense, that he had told her something different. And that's when everything spilled out. The contractor spoke again, this time louder, explaining how he'd been promised payment, how he'd been pushed aside, how excuses kept piling up. Other small details started coming together. Stories didn't line up. Numbers didn't match. My brother-in-law tried to regain control. He raised his voice, accused me of trying to humiliate him, accused the contractor of lying, and accused everyone else of turning on him. But the room had shifted. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't nodding along. They were listening. And for the first time, they were seeing him clearly. My sister started asking questions. Real ones, not the soft kind. The kind that comes from a place of hurt and betrayal. She asked about the money he'd told her they couldn't afford to spend. She asked about the accounts he managed. She asked why she never saw certain statements. He stumbled over his answers. He contradicted himself. And with every word, the image she had of him cracked a little more. Our grandmother spoke last. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. She said she trusted him with her family. She said she believed he loved my sister for who she was, not what she had. And then she said something that made the room go completely still. She said she was disappointed. Not angry, disappointed. And that hurt him more than anything else. The contractor eventually left, promised payment finally arranged, but the damage was already done. My brother-in-law didn't stay much longer. He made excuses, grabbed his things, and left without looking back. My sister didn't follow him. She sat down slowly, her hands shaking, staring at the table like she was seeing everything for the first time. Later that night, after everyone else had gone home, she came to me. She cried the way you cry when you realize you ignored your own voice for too long. She said she didn't know when things changed. She said she thought love meant letting someone lead, and I told her something I wish I'd said sooner. Love doesn't take your control, it doesn't silence you, and it doesn't make you smaller. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were lawyers, conversations that hurt, trust that had to be rebuilt piece by piece. My sister left him, not dramatically, quietly, with strength she didn't know she still had, and little by little she started sounding like herself again. As for me, I learned something too. Staying quiet can be powerful, but speaking up matters too. Timing is everything. And sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted, it just needs space to surface. The beach house is still there. The waves still crash the same way they always have. And every time I stand on that porch, I think about how close we came to losing more than just property. We almost lost each other, but we didn't, and that's what matters. Because in the end, people who chase easy money usually lose the things that matter most. And the ones who wait, who watch, and who protect quietly are the ones who walk away with everything that really counts. If this story hits close to home, don't keep it to yourself. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. These stories aren't just drama, they're warnings, lessons, and reminders. Drop a like if you believe family should never be treated like a business deal. And tell me in the comments, would you have stayed quiet or spoken up sooner?